I never thought the house would feel so cold after death. My father, a stern man who rarely laughed and never cried, passed on a gray October morning, the kind that hangs low over your head like a ceiling about to collapse. I sat in the front pew of St. Agnes Church, my suit still stiff from the dry cleaner, the scent of mothballs clinging to it like regret. The priest spoke in platitudes, a good man, a quiet man, a provider, but none of it pierced the fog sitting behind my eyes. I kept scanning the rows behind me, counting the heads, and yet it was only family, only blood, only those who now stood to gain. My sister Rachel sat 2 rows behind me, her hand clutched in her husband's lap like some trophy. She didn't cry. Her kids, perfectly dressed and equally detached, swung their feet under the pews, whispering about how long the whole thing would take. My Uncle Peter, Dad's brother and self-appointed patriarch since the moment the paramedics wheeled the body away, kept shaking hands and nodding, like he'd been waiting years to take on the role of spokesman. I had loved my father, or at least I had tried to, but he loved Rachel. It wasn't a secret. He called her my diamond, my little queen, even when we were grown. While I spent summer mornings sweating beside him, sanding deck wood or cleaning engine grease off the boat, she was inside watching cartoons or being praised for memorizing piano scales. She was delicate. I was expected to be iron. I tried for years to earn the kind of smile he gave her freely. But love, in his eyes, was a fixed amount, a currency he'd already spent. Still, I stayed. I worked beside him in the family business called Well and Sons Marine Repair because that's what a son did. I followed every order, never questioned why my ideas were dismissed or why he never once let me sign a company check. And now he was gone. The day of the reading, we gathered in a walnut-paneled office that smelled of paper and dust. Mr. Reed's, Dad's lawyer, adjusted his glasses and gave us a look I couldn't quite read, part guilt, part restraint. Before I begin, he said, voice taut, I want to remind everyone that this was your father's final legal testament, signed and notarized. I sat straighter. Rachel smiled faintly, like she already knew. It was quick, brutal. Dad left everything to Rachel. The house, the shop, the bank accounts, the boat. Not a dollar, not a trinket, not a memory for me, just the cold, polite line to my son Daniel, I leave no part of my estate, no explanation, no apology. The room shrank around me. I heard blood in my ears, the thrum of a betrayal that reached so deep I couldn't speak. Rachel leaned forward, feigning surprise, but her eyes, those calculating eyes, gleamed. I didn't know, she said softly, putting a hand over her heart. Dan, don't, I said. My voice came out hoarse, unfamiliar. I walked out before Reeds could finish. The days that followed were a haze of silence and unanswered questions. I went back to the house, our childhood home, just to walk the halls one last time. I didn't have the heart to take anything, not that there was much left for me to take. She was having the locks changed by Monday. I drove aimlessly after that. For hours, I traced the coastline roads north of Fairport Harbor, stopping only when I found myself near Dad's old cabin, his sanctuary, the one he'd stopped using years ago after Mom died. He never sold it, just let it rot. Something told me to check it. I didn't have a key. But I still remembered how to climb up the shed's old woodpile, crawl through the attic window where the latch was always broken. It smelled like mildew and damp wood inside. I moved through the dust with a flashlight from my truck, brushing aside cobwebs like ghost stories. I didn't expect to find anything. But in the back bedroom, behind a sagging wardrobe, I found a metal lockbox, heavy, scratched. The key was taped to the underside of an old drawer. Inside was a folder, handwritten, stamped. A will, dated just 6 months ago. My heart galloped. My hands shook as I unfolded the pages. The ink was fresh enough to still carry a scent. At the bottom, my father's name, his signature, undeniable. I, Richard Caldwell, being of sound mind and body, do declare this to be my last will and testament. He left the business to me, the house, the accounts. The boat. To Rachel, a small trust in gratitude for her care during my early illness. I read it again. And again. It wasn't a draft, it was the real thing, signed Notarized. Then why hadn't It'd been the one Reed. I drove straight to Mr. Reed's office the next morning. He looked startled when I placed the will on his desk. He picked it up, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. As he did, his face drained. I don't understand. He murmured, "This is very recent, this signature, this notary's seal. Why wasn't this in my file? You tell me," I said, watching him closely. He licked his lips. Your father never sent me this. I swear it. Then someone intercepted it. He didn't answer. I took the copy back and walked out. Later that night, I drove to Rachel's house. She was hosting a little celebration of life. I could see lights on, people drinking wine, laughter floating out onto the porch. I didn't go in. Instead, I parked across the street and stared at her new life, her effortless victory. I thought about the years I'd spent serving our father, about the way he looked at me cold, critical, but still expected me to carry everything. And now this. No. This wasn't over. I had the real will. I had a legal weapon. But legal battles are slow, quiet, dull. Rachel had made sure my father died in the eyes of the law as a man who left his only son with nothing. Now she would see what it meant to be disinherited, not with rage, not with chaos, with precision, with revenge. I didn't go to war immediately. Revenge is like hunting. If you run straight into the woods, screaming and swinging a stick, you come home with nothing but splinters. But if you wait, watch, listen, you find the perfect moment to strike. And you don't miss. So I stayed quiet. I didn't call Rachel, didn't threaten a lawsuit, didn't ask Reeds any more questions, though I watched his office from time to time. A man who botches something that big usually leaves another crack in the door. I kept the will in a fireproof case beneath my bed, took high-resolution scans, even consulted a private lawyer in Cleveland, someone far outside our local web of favors and family connections. He confirmed what I suspected. The secret will was valid. It superseded the older one by every legal standard. And if the courts saw it, everything Rachel now claimed would crumble like ash. The trust fund she'd already spent on redoing the kitchen, the business she was managing into the ground. The social clout she was enjoying. Poor Rachel, her father's favorite, always so graceful under pressure. It was all temporary. I just had to wait. Then the real break came. It was an email, an anonymous burner account, no name, just a subject line, "You're not crazy." She found it. Inside, one grainy, low-res photo. Rachel, holding a manila envelope, standing in Dad's study the week after his death. The angle suggested it was taken through the window. The timestamp, the same morning she told me she was just helping clear out paperwork. Another message followed. She shredded something that looked like a legal packet. I wasn't sure until now. I thought, you should know. I stared at the photo for a long time. Something cold, something cruel, settled inside me. Not sadness, not even fury, just clarity. Rachel had found the real will, and she had destroyed it, except she hadn't. She'd missed the copy he hid in the cabin. She had declared herself the heir with full knowledge of the truth. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't misfiling. That was fraud, theft, and possibly more. I replied, "Do you have anything else?" The account never messaged again. It didn't matter. The photo was enough. I began the quiet war. First, I applied pressure to Reeds. I didn't accuse him, not outright, but I requested a certified letter from him acknowledging the omission and gently reminded him that this could look very bad for you if this went public. The man buckled within a week. Sent a notarized letter stating that he had no knowledge of the updated will and had received no instruction from Ms. Rachel Caldwell to override previous documents. That was my insurance. Now, I could afford to bleed her slowly. She didn't even know I was coming while she was renovating the marina office and hosting wine and cheese events to honor Dad's memory. I was collecting names, old clients, former workers, everyone who'd ever been slighted or dismissed by Rachel when she swooped in after the funeral and declared herself the new boss. It turned out she was terrible at running the business. She had no idea how to negotiate with the dock unions. She talked down to the repair crews. She turned down a key seasonal contract out of sheer arrogance, and the company was hemorrhaging cash. I whispered in the right ears. A competitor, eager to poach disillusioned clients, sent an acquisition offer that undercut her valuation by half, she turned it down publicly, haughtily, without realizing that half the staff had already sent in their resignations that same week. The marina started rusting under her. Then I went for the press, not the Fairport Times. They were family friends, and their editor was at her backyard luncheon last month. No, I went to an investigative reporter from a Cleveland weekly. Quiet, focused, sharp as a scalpel. I didn't give them everything. Just a taste, just enough to start a story. A dead father, a missing will, a replacement that favored one child with no explanation, a tip that the liar had never seen the latest version. The headline. What did Rachel Caldwell know, and when did she know it? It was out by the following Monday. She didn't call me, but I heard from Reeds, furious, flustered, warning me that I was escalating things that should stay in family hands. I reminded him that his name had been omitted from the article, and that if he wanted it to stay that way, he'd better stop calling. I went back to the cabin that night. Sat on the porch with a flask of bourbon. The lake was silent. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Dad had hidden the truth where no one else would find it, but I did, and I was going to make sure the world saw it. The next blow came 2 days later. Rachel received a formal legal letter from my attorney, a cease and desist, demanding she step down from all company operations pending a probate investigation into the validity of the second will. That's when she finally called me. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't my sister's. It was a stranger's, clipped, cold, exhausted. "You think you're clever," she said, dragging us through the mud, making us look like fools. "There's no us," I said. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I laughed. "You burned Dad's last will." Rachel, silence. "I didn't know it was. You shredded it." More silence. And then, very quietly, "He never loved you, Dan. You think this fixes that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was still that boy in the garage, waiting for a pat on the back that never came. But I knew this much. She didn't get to him by stealing. That same week, the Cleveland lawyer filed an emergency petition to enter the newly discovered will into probate. We submitted the original, the scanned copies, the notarization, and even the anonymous photograph as supporting evidence. It would take time, but the court had already issued a freeze order on the estate. Rachel couldn't touch a cent until it was resolved. I found myself driving to Dad's grave for the first time since the funeral. I didn't bring flowers, just stood there, the wind sharp and dry, and said nothing. What would I have told him? That I found what he wanted me to find. That I was going to undo the last thing Rachel ever controlled. That even though he left me nothing, I still wanted to believe he'd meant to make it right. I walked away without an answer, but my hand never once left the inside pocket of my coatwear. The second will rested, folded, warm from my body heat. A quiet storm had begun, and Rachel was only just beginning to feel the rain. The court date came faster than I expected. There were no dramatic outbursts or gasps, just a hushed courtroom, the shuffle of papers, the slow turn of legal machinery. But beneath the surface, every tick of the clock felt like the tightening of a noose. Rachel sat across from me, perfectly made up, her lawyer whispering into her ear. But her eyes kept darting to the folder in my hand. She knew what was in it. She knew it was over. The judge was a gray-haired woman with a voice like iron scraping glass. She took her time, asked questions, reviewed signatures, compared dates. "Miss Caldwell," she said, fixing Rachel with a look that pierced straight through the layers of perfume and false humility. "You testified that your father made no additional legal filings after the 2018 will?" Rachel swallowed. "To my knowledge, no. To your knowledge," the judge repeated. "And yet this 2024 will carries your father's notarized signature, and a date just 6 months prior to his death. Witnesses confirm he discussed the revisions. You offered no explanation for why it was not submitted." Rachel's lips parted slightly, then closed again. The judge didn't smile. "Fraudulent suppression of a valid will is not merely a family squabble, Miss Caldwell, it's a felony. The court will consider whether charges are appropriate for. Now, I'm ruling that the latter will is valid and supersedes the previous version." She turned to me. Double quotes, "Mr. Caldwell, you're hereby recognized as the primary heir to your father's estate." There were no cheers. No claps, just the sound of Rachel's world collapsing inward. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood, nodded to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom with the folder tucked beneath my arm like a weapon I no longer needed to draw. The days that followed were a slower balancing of power. First, the business, my business now. I returned to the Marine office quietly, walked the floors. Spoke with the old hands who'd stuck around, who remembered when I used to crawl under boats with grease-stained notebooks and ideas for faster hydraulic lifts. Some shook my hand with visible relief. Others offered apologies. We didn't know what she did. Dan, we didn't know. I didn't need their apologies. I just needed their loyalty. I rehired the best techs she'd fired, canceled the PR firm she'd hired for glossy newsletters no one read. Re-signed the summer charter contract she'd botched. Within 6 weeks, the company was solvent again. Not thriving but breathing, the house took longer to reclaim. Rachel hadn't done much to it, she barely lived there, but standing in the living room again felt like visiting the ghost of a man I still didn't understand. I wandered through the study where he'd always shut the door when I knocked, sat in his chair, opened the drawers, hoping for something more. There was no apology letter, no final confession, but I did find a note folded into the last page of a dog-eared ledger he kept. Written in his tight, angular hand, I don't always get the words right, but I see him, he shows up, he carries weight. He's the one I trust to protect what I've built. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. It was enough. Rachel left town. No dramatic exit, no farewell dinner, just one day she was goner. Social accounts shuttered, her house up for sale, her name spoken in careful, embarrassed tones around Fairport. The papers didn't run a follow-up, but people knew. They always do in a town like this. I heard she moved to Chicago. Someone said she tried to open a boutique. Another rumor said she changed her last name. I didn't chase her. Not because I forgave her, but because I'd already won. She tried to erase me with a lie, but I brought the truth back from the ashes. I didn't press charges. I could have. My attorney advised it. The doll would have had a case, but in the end, I didn't want to watch her dragged through court again. That would have been vengeance for its own sake. And revenge isn't fireworks or fist fights. It's watching someone sit in the house they stole, knowing every wall is crumbling because of what they did, and then leaving them in the ruins. One evening, I returned to the cabin. It was spring now. The lake was thawed, the air heavy with the scent of earth and sap. I brought a bottle of Dad's favorite scotch and 2 glasses. I sat on the porch, poured 1 glass, set it on the railing beside me, and I talked about the business, about how the guys had started calling the new office Don's Dock, about how the books were clean now, about how I was thinking of tearing down the old shed and building something new, something Mom would have liked, about the will. About how he'd made a mistake, but also maybe he tried to fix it in his own way. I wanted you to say it, I murmured, raising my glass. Just once, that I did right, that I mattered. The wind stirred the leaves. I waited for something. A sign, a whisper, a shift in the air, but there was only the quiet lapping of the lake against the rocks, and that was enough. 3 months later, I got a letter. It was unmarked, no return address. Just a single sheet of paper. You were always the stronger one. I envied that. I hated you for it. I burned the will, but it didn't burn you. You won. No apology. No signature beyond that single initial. Just a confession. I read it once, then folded it and slid it into the fire. Let it burn, because the past, once it's faced, no longer controls you. My father left me nothing. No money, no house, no words of comfort. But he left me something else, a trail, a truth worth digging for, a legacy that tried to die in silence, but lived because I refused to let it go. And in the end, I didn't just inherit a fortune, I inherited myself, and that was worth more than anything he ever could have written in ink.